welcome on into another episode of Oh So Curious, where I am, of course, Daniel, and with me today, I also happen to have three other curious minds, which basically accounts for four curious minds? Let me do the math. That's three plus one, so that accounts for four curious minds on today's show. And today's topic that we're going to be talking about is nostalgia. As you probably read the title of what the podcast that you're listening to, or you're watching the show, the nostalgia trap specifically is what we're talking about, the lure and the pitfalls of nostalgia content. So with me today, let's get to the introductions. We, of course, will start with one of the best people on this channel, one of the best people on the crew, the person with the most badass office of all. It's Roland. How are you doing today, Roland?
I totally thought you were going to be like, oh, me. But, like, for you. So, thank you. I appreciate that. That was really nice. Yes, I
was on screen already.
We really like it.
Yeah.
I was on screen already. You can't. All right, well.
It's fair. Also, I want to show off this.
Yeah?
I brought the mullets for this nostalgic.
Nice.
Nice.
Really rocking it.
Thank you.
Joe Exotic.
You look like a young Billy Ray Cyrus. That's what I'll say.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
No. Joe Exotic.
Speaking of mullets and Billy Ray Cyrus,
Yeah.
also with us today, we have Max. How are you doing today, Max?
I am great. No mohawk, but yeah, and actually much poorer office, so I need to up my game there. Ron's really making us all shy there. That is a really sweet looking office.
That's what I
But
do.
yeah, I'm great. Thank you for having me today. It's good to be back.
Yes, and
Yeah.
speaking of being good to be back, because that's the only thing you got me there to work with as a transition. Let's go to the next person on our show. Yeah. We're just gonna roll with it. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I mean, after an introduction like that, who could complain? I'm doing great. I'm happy to be back as well.
Awesome.
What's going on today?
Well, we're as always, we're four curious minds trying to tell time, as I've already said that before. But today, what we are trying to tell time about is nostalgia. So nostalgia is an interesting subject. It's a subject of much debate. It's a subject of much discussion. It's all about the lure. I gotta figure out how to say that right. The lure and pitfalls of nostalgia content. You know, after you say the word like 10 times, it starts to sound weird. The lure. Anyway, what do you guys think about what do you think about nostalgia in general? You like it? You don't like it? You hate it? Rather not talk about it?
Honestly, it's I'm always weary of or wary? Yeah, I'm wary of it. I don't trust it. I think it's a disingenuous marketing ploy.
Yeah, well,
I disagree, but we'll get into it.
Yeah.
There will be time and place.
There will be plenty of disagreement, plenty of agreement, plenty of debate. But what we will kick off the show with is something new that we are deciding to do today, and we hope to do this again in the future. But let's figure out what this is in the first place. We're gonna play a new game today. The game's called Gut Check. We're gonna figure out just how we. I hope just my gut. Like how are you feeling? Can you feel it? Like these new movies and TV shows that are coming out this year, the year 2022. We want to figure out how, is this stuff you're excited about? Is this stuff we're not excited about? Give it a thumbs up if you are excited. Give me a thumbs down if you're not excited. It's as simple as that. We picked out a bunch of new things that are coming out. Obviously, we're going to try to keep it related to, the subject matter at hand. So let's get started. We're going to put up a number of posters, and for each one, give me a thumbs up, give me a thumbs down. Let's get going. All right? So, very first one, Uncharted, Tom Holland, Mark Wahlberg. Top Gun Maverick. Really?
I'm gonna keep this
Vikings
down.
Valhalla.
Never watched it.
History Channel? No. Thor: Love and Thunder. I like my MCU, and that poster looks sick. Godfather coming back to theaters.
Oh,
I'm not gonna pay to see it again, but
Multiverse
good
of
for them
Madness.
for
Well,
bringing
you'll
it back.
have to. It's in theaters.
No.
The Gilded Age? Yeah.
Benedict. Nah, I don't know what that is.
The Batman? Oh.
Oh,
the
yeah.
I'm sorry, but that trailer
I'm
was
actually,
that first trailer.
The Black Phone?
Okay.
Ethan Hawke?
Yes.
I don't know what that is.
That's actually original. I'm mixing it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Bel Air. Yeah, no.
It is kind of in the 70s or 80s.
Netflix is bringing back
Texas-
Texas Chainsaw.
That
Sonic?
deserves a good
Sonic?
one.
Sonic?
No,
No, I'm not liking it either.
don't care.
Jordan
Yeah.
Peele?
Don't
No?
care.
No? No?
Oh my gosh, I could
yeah.
look at
Morbius?
Well.
No? I want to see Jared Leto. Looks exciting.
Yes, I was a
I
fan
like
of the comic.
Oscar
One of my
Isaac.
favorites. Lord of the Rings.
I love how
that gets
Andrew's
double
frame is
thumb.
not changed
I will give 2 thumbs up to
whatsoever.
Lightyear.
What is
I've watched the
Kimi?
trailer for this. It's
This one's
It
this
looks
one's
good.
Zoe Kravitz. Little just Dominion,
Oh,
Jurassic
another
World.
one.
Halo?
No.
Halo? No?
I'm
It's
just
a
gonna make mine
decent
bigger.
game.
Halloween Ends? Yeah, no, I'm not gonna
I'm
like
very
that.
excited for
I don't
that.
like that. Force? Power Book 4? Yeah? No?
I saw the trailer for this.
I
I'm
know this
interested to
girl
see how
from
it goes.
somewhere.
I have no idea what that is.
FBI International? That's another Dick Wolf stuff. Secrets of Dumbledore. Going back to
Oh my
Hogwarts.
god.
Elvis?
No.
Elvis Andrew?
No.
I like
Me and Andrew talked
Austin
about
Butler.
Downton Abbey?
Austin Butler.
No.
I don't care.
No.
Andrew,
Yeah.
how's your thumb down?
it.
My arm's getting tired.
I think that's the last one. But
Is
if
that
you
it?
guys-
Is that the last
Yeah, that's the
one?
last
Okay.
one. That's the last one.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
I am not impressed or excited about most of those things.
Well,
I
as
will
you,
probably
But
end, I will probably end up watching the Elvis movie, even though I'm not impressed by what I've seen for it. Fair to say that that's not my gut reaction, but I did see the trailer and I was happy to see Elvis again because I like
I don't think
Elvis.
that's Elvis.
What
No,
about
that's
No,
that's
well,
Sonic.
there's
Oh,
We're
a,
just
yeah,
talking
yeah.
mullets today. Sonic, Elvis, people with big hair. You know, big hair is back. That's another thing.
Andrew, I was
Shout out to
literally about to back
Brian.
you up, but I changed my mind. I'm
Oh,
totally
okay.
against what you're saying. I think
Oh, good. Yeah, why is that?
Austin Butler has heavy potential as Elvis. I'm definitely excited to see how that goes.
He's an incredible actor, I think. And Baz Luhrmann, come on.
Yeah,
what
The
could go
Great
wrong?
Gatsby.
Moulin Rouge.
I'm excited. That trailer. I mean, look, I'm probably not gonna go see it in theaters. I'm 100% being honest with you guys. Probably not gonna go see it in
Yeah.
theaters, but the trailer looks interesting. I mean, who knows? Maybe it's like sitting at 98% and everybody loves it, and you know the critic score is great and the audience score is great on Rotten Tomatoes. And I read like a review and it's just like draws me into the theaters, but it's coming out in the
Right.
summertime. You know, there's like 12
Yeah.
comic book movies coming out this year, and
Who's got
those-
the time?
I feel like those are bigger
That's a
attractions
lot.
at the theater. You know, they're gonna see those on a big screen and not necessarily an Elvis movie, but it's probably worth checking out. But the theme, of course, here was prequels, sequels, reboots, spin-offs, adaptations. There are just so many pieces of content there that we saw, and I think a good 90% of those were not original IP. They're like Kimmy, I
Yeah.
think was original.
Yeah.
Was that it? I think. I mean, them the
Yeah.
the Black Phone. That's original.
That's like it. If you really want to put it, it does kind of have a nostalgic effect because it is based, I think, in the 70s.
Yeah, well, it's
Wow.
again, it's playing on nostalgia in a different way, which I think again,
Yeah.
as we get into it, we can talk about how maybe nostalgia doesn't have to be go and take a pre-existing IP. Maybe
Yeah.
you know instead go and like what Stranger Things did. You know, it's trying to draw on that 80s nostalgia, but doing it with something brand new, so it doesn't feel quite as like cheating. You know, like you're gnawing on
It
our.
worked.
It does it. Okay.
Well, that's an interesting point because, as we've mentioned before, like a common thread that we've seen through a lot of the media coming out right now is that we're not seeing anything that takes place now.
Right.
And it's either far in the future or it's in the past and we're reliving that because we're really not happy with the time we're living in. We're living in
Yeah.
everybody's at home. There's nothing going on. There aren't stories to be told right now. Or if they are, it's not the stories people want to tell.
Right. Well,
That is a good point because a lot of these movies that are coming and they are in this time, they're dramas or they're sad or they're. So I agree
Yeah.
with that.
Reflects on current time for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of people are also yearning for escapism. You know, you want to escape the realities of life. The world as a collective, I think, feels depressed. But, you know, we're not going to get too deep into that right now because we have a lot to talk about. And I think when we get into the the full discussion, we will have plenty to talk about as far as nostalgia. The lure, I think I'm getting it now. The lure and pitfalls of nostalgia. But before we
Well
do
done.
that, what?
Well
Well
done.
done.
Well, thank you. But before we do that, I want to plug our podcast. If you're already listening to this and you're listening to the podcast, great job. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. But if you are not listening to the podcast, let me implore you to go check us out on Apple, on Spotify, on any number of our other, any other podcasting platform you might use, whether it's Deezer or TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, wherever you can find podcasts. You can find the Oh So Curious podcast. And if you're out and about, you're at the gym, maybe you're driving somewhere, maybe you're just working and you want to have it playing in the background. Maybe you don't have enough screen space on your laptop to be watching a YouTube video and be listening to a podcast, or be watching 2 videos at the same time. You just want to listen to the podcast. You don't want to see our ugly faces. You just want to listen to us talk. And if that's the case, please do check out our podcast. Listen to it today. We would really, 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 really appreciate it.
Well, I would love to
serious when
see
he does.
Roland's mohawk. Sorry, Roland. What? I was
Well,
gonna
if
say,
you are
'cause
listening
that's
to
Or the
us-
like,
mohawk, because I have had
Yeah.
both.
not everyone wants to see our ugly faces, but I would pay money to see Roland's face right now.
Listen,
Anyway.
I don't lump me in with the ugly group. All right, I feel confident today. I don't
Yeah.
need that
Well-
trash talk.
Here's what I'll say. If you're listening to the podcast and now you're intrigued about what Roland's mohawk looks like, please do go to YouTube and check us out
It's a
on
mullet.
YouTube.
It's the
Yeah.
mullet.
Yeah, YouTube's mullet. See,
It's no mohawk.
I got the
either.
lower
Yeah,
part
it's a
right, but then I
Thank you,
messed up the
Andrew.
mohawk with the mullet. You get it. The mohawk. I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna make the same mistake again. Let's just move on before
Okay.
I trip over myself too much. So let's get into it. Is nostalgia a problem? I want to talk about how Hollywood is so IP hungry these days. So much of the new content. We already played the game Gut Reaction. Basically 90+%, 95% of what you saw was some form of pre-existing IP that was being redeveloped in some sort of way, or built upon, rather than taking something original. And there were a couple of examples of that. But talking about nostalgia, is it too much of a good thing? I think nostalgia it's a low risk, high reward proposition. So economically, it makes sense for Hollywood. There's built-in audiences to pre-existing IP, whether it's a video game, a comic book, another movie series, a novel, or even something as simple as a cartoon strip like Garfield used to be. You have a pre-existing audience that will recognize it and say, oh, they're doing this with it, I want to go check it out, whether it's a movie or TV show. So that's my take. I think economically it makes sense, and if you're a businessman investing money, if you're an investor, you're more likely to get a return because there's a greater guarantee. But I would like to ask you guys, what do you guys think? Is nostalgia a problem? Are we too IP hungry these days? Like, Andrew, I'll start with you. What are your thoughts?
Honestly, I'm not a fan of nostalgia. I think that it's like I said before, it's disingenuous. It's really purely marketing, and it's giving the same people the same chance to do something that we've already seen before. What we end up seeing is really akin to the Pet Sematary. When Netflix brought back Arrested Development, which was a fantastic show in its own right, 3 seasons on Fox. That's what got me to download Netflix the first time. I was really excited that they were going to bring that show back. They did. It was structured differently. They brought on new writers. There was different lighting, different directors. It was basically a different show. And
Right.
even though we see the same faces, we see a lot of the same situations, the soul is different. And that seems to be the case for a lot of these reboots that, why are we bringing these back is really my question. What do we gain by revisiting this that's different than just watching it again?
Yeah, well, that is a very good question you pose. What's the big deal? Why go back to these pre-existing IPs? Is it because, like you said, it just draws in an audience that is curious, like we usually are? Mags, what do you think? Why is that?
I agree with a lot what Andrew said, but I don't know. I'm a sucker for those things. You guys remember how hyped I was about Matrix having its comeback. And yes, a lot of those films are not good by any means, because it's, you cannot, very often they just cannot capture the actual gist of what those films had. And as Yudan said, like, it's well known that if they try to run it with an original screenplay, it comes with a huge risk. Going for an already established IP is just, it's a safer bet, safer way to spend your money. And it's a bottomless pit, it's bottomless well. We just can keep drawing things from it all the time, from like series to TV shows. You can just make anything out of it. Like look at what, especially when you look at like Marvel or Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, fantasies tend to be a huge one. And yeah, going back to the game as well, like a lot of those things I think you just showed weren't that great. There are quite exciting things happening. Not everything is rubbish, because some of the things is just fun to, I don't know, to see different talent, new talent being introduced to something that's been, already running. Like a bad case would be what they did to Hobbit, I suppose, because obviously Peter Jackson went for 48, was it, frames per second instead of the standard 24, and it ended up having the opposite effect. Instead of making it like the point was to make it seem like it was happening live in front of you, but it looked completely artificial to me.
I see what you're saying. But
if you look at things like Mandalorian, right?
Yeah,
that was phenomenal.
But
because,
before, No. I totally get what you're saying, but I feel like once you start talking about frame rates and things of that nature, those kind of creative decisions, you're talking about the creative approach from the artist versus like the concept of how it ties into the nostalgia. Because, I think what we want to talk about here specifically would be the idea of The Hobbit is an adaptation of a book series. So again, but that Hollywood has been doing that for decades. The problem isn't necessarily the fact that they adapted.
It was more the adaptation of the new technology, because that's a lot of the times what they try to improve. They try to use what the industry has to offer now and use that to the advantage. But The Hobbit was not a success. And even though, for example, Lord of the Rings looks like it's going to be an incredible story.
I was going to say, how do you feel about that?
So it doesn't look as exciting. Me and Dan had a private conversation, I think on a group chat actually, that they still have some time to make it look more polished, like more realistic. Right now it looks just like Hobbit. It's not as realistic as, you had the same feel and sense of the Shire happening and stuff, whereas I don't know. I am still excited for the story, because the book and the whole history behind the Middle Earth, like it's very fascinating. So it hits the soft spot. So to you, Andrew, yes, a lot of the times they're ruining the concept or the story, but sometimes you can actually get a different take on the same story. Introduce new characters, use new technology, and attract not only the old audiences but the new ones, and kind of sell the story to them. So it will be quite interesting to see how the Lord of the Rings will be accepted by people now.
Yeah.
To your point about putting different actors in, or different creators attached to the same stories, I find something I'm seeing a lot, not just in the remakes of things, but in retelling history. They are literally either changing the history, or they are trying to use something that we like in order to preach a different perspective, a different ideology, or it turns a character into a puppet for somebody with an ideological agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see that.
Well, I want to go. Okay, so I get everything you guys are saying, but I'm like, let's bring the conversation back to just the concept of nostalgia on its own, because I really like what Andrew said earlier. Like, he said that a lot of times what ends up happening with nostalgic content is the zombification effect, where you take something that was great when it was first done. I think maybe it's not fair to look at like something that's being adapted from book to screen for the first time as an example of that. I think what we're talking about here is more specifically something that was already done for the screen, whether it's for TV or for a movie, and then it's being revisited and being built upon or being rehashed in some way. And you start to get the zombification effect where, even at the very most basic, what's been done for decades, the concept of a sequel where most sequels tend to be inferior to the original because you can easily tell when it's a cash grab. Because they lure you with the familiar and then they say, okay, well, they pick out the wrong things to rehash and then they forget to add anything new. So you get this
It's a bait and switch.
Effect. Exactly, it's a bait and switch. Like, I mean, I think there's many examples of it. I think to be honest, I'll have an easier time picking out exceptions to the rule than, the ones that are the examples to discuss, because they're just, I feel like 9 out of 10 sequels sort of fall into that category of the zombification effect. So Roland, coming to you, I can tell how do you feel about this, because you're a big horror fan, the fan of the horror genre of movies, right? And we went through that gut reaction earlier, and in that you noticed that there were at least 3 horror franchises, these classic horror franchises that are either being rehashed, have spin-offs, or have sequels, and at this point it just feels like, why? Like, I mean, maybe not everybody says why. Maybe people are like, oh, why not? But you tell me, why or why not?
Horror is a really bad sucker for nostalgia. These past couple years, we're going through a really big surge of like horror remakes and adaptations. There's the new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, new Scream, the Halloween trilogy. They're making a new Exorcist. But this isn't the first time.
Are you kidding?
Oh, yeah, no, they're filming in North Carolina.
There's another one. Yeah.
But this happened
How many did we have? Like 5, 6?
What, Exorcist movies?
Yeah.
I want to say this is the 4th one.
Wow.
Don't quote me on that.
Okay.
I've only seen the first
I
one.
wouldn't be able to tell you. I mean, all I can tell you is that there's way too many Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies out there.
Yeah, that's a weird one because there's a lot of I don't know if they're connected. There's a lot of different. It's weird, but there's also the cliche of every horror movie has tons of sequels. So the horror franchise is really bad, but it sucks to say, but nostalgia is the greatest marketing technique possible because if you recognize a title or something like that and it has your attention immediately, you're not gonna get a better attention seeker than that. Like Andrew admitted himself, he heard that there was a new season of Arrested Development, so he had to check this out, no matter how good or bad something is, because that is a really risky thing when you're adapting something you really like. You have to check it out for yourself. It's an urge.
Roland, are you saying this works especially for horror? So maybe, reboot sequels and stuff should maybe just stick to horror? Do you think that would make better sequels?
Yes,
like, because because
Hmm.
you're like our horror resident, so I'm just wondering, like, are sequels for horrors generally better, like sequels, reboots, and stuff, or?
I am so honored. It differs because sometimes you'll get a really good adaptation to a very subpar horror movie, and it'll make the experience better, and you're able to, like. Personally, I like to watch. If I watch a reboot and it's fantastic, it gives me a different view on the original.
Right.
It just depends. Like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, I've always had a weird opinion about. I have yet to see this new one, but I'm excited because it's a fresh take. But
well, it
no,
doesn't
I
always
don't-
it doesn't always lend itself to saying to an audience, hey, this is a remake. Like Nightmare Alley, great movie. The new one, it is a remake, and it is based on a book. It's not being advertised as anything but that. But there are a million.
Smart. I didn't know that. I didn't know it was based off of.
There are a million examples of movies that we don't even know are remakes because they were remade, but by the time we were born, the old one had been out for 30 years.
Yeah.
So
I will say reboots are a problem because you're gonna know the ending.
That's true.
And that,
No.
But
that comes
sometimes
with things.
reboots they change the ending. Like they will
I was
not.
gonna say
It's a spiritual
Dark
reboot
Knight-
rather than a literal reboot of something.
the Dark Knight trilogy, I think, is the best example of it. No one
Well-
knew what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Well, let me pose you guys this question. I think we have at this point established that there's a lot of reboots. There's a lot of sequels, spin-offs, like basically nostalgia in many different forms. But where does it where does it end? When does it end? Should it end? Like, will we run out of things to reboot? Because we talked, like Andrew, you mentioned, there's a lot of reboots and remakes out there that we don't even know they are that. Like, I'll give you an example. What was it? The Little Things that came. There was a new version of that came out a couple of years ago. A Star Is Born with Lady Gaga, the newest iteration.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
And that movie that was a
brilliant.
remake of a remake of a remake of a remake, and I'm not even exaggerating. That was like the 5th time they remade it. And if you go back in time, I think the original movie was in the 30s, and they basically remade it like on average every 15 years or something like that. So there is the concept of periodically you go and you remake a story that is so classic, like like a Shakespearean story. Not saying that A Star Is Born is a Shakespearean story. You might call it that, but we're okay with. I mean, are we okay with that kind of reboot where you go back and you're remaking, like, say, the West Side Story from Steven Spielberg, a remake of the original? I think the two movies are 60 years apart. So there's really a new generation of people that can discover it fresh, and they updated a lot of the elements to kind of go along with. I mean, it still takes place in the time period that the original story does, the play, but it's updated in terms of like what the audience's expectations are, what society expects today. So it's culturally, it reflects the world that it is made for today versus the one that was made in the 60s. Like,
I
so
dare
which
to
is
say
there
it's-
one way to do it that's right and one way to do it that's not right, or do you feel like it's sort of a sliding scale?
Mags,
think you make
a
you're
lot of
good
saying
points.
something.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I got you.
No,
Go ahead,
Max,
Max.
you tell me, what do you think about that?
Because there was one thing that I just thought instantly. I dare to say it's educational content, essentially. It doesn't have to be the best content out there, and obviously they are marketing it very often for it. But as you, Dan, said, for the audiences that had no idea this thing existed in the first place, like Star Is Born, the only reason why I knew about it was because I deeply studied film, but apart from that, I would have never heard of it and up until the Lady Gaga version. So it's educational. It's nice way to revisit and see again what else has been out there.
And
But yeah, Andrew, Rowan, what do you
I
guys?
was
Yeah.
gonna say, I think. Andrew, you go. No, I talked.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Dan, I think you make a really good point about classics, about the Shakespeares, about the Broadway musical things that have been classics. I mean, every time a Broadway performance is done on stage, it's a little bit different. And that's sort of exciting. That's the exciting part about live theater and all that kind of stuff. I think I like the idea, and here's where I'll deviate with you. I like the idea of saying our technology is better, the sound could be better, the orchestration could be slightly different. The acting might take on there's just different storytelling techniques that are available or
Right.
that we've developed since the original was made. Where I do take issue is what you say with like trying to reflect today's culture. You can make it more tasteful in terms of the type of quality that we expect. To say, like, my favorite example is The Fly. In 1950, it was a guy with a fly head walking around. And by the 1980s, you have Jeff Goldblum and some really good practical effects. It was creepy. It was scary. It was a completely different kind of movie. So if you're going to do something different with it and you're going to reflect the culture, it should really, I think, it should reflect the state of the art, not necessarily the state of belief.
That's a
Yeah.
really good example, Andrew.
No,
Thanks.
I like. I'll go back to saying like what I was saying earlier. I think it's a lot of nostalgic content. I think it's a reflection of the society that we live in. Like I think, like what the question that we're posing on screen now is, what are we trying to recapture? And
Yeah.
I think it's usually it's not just about. I think if you watch a movie, like let's say The Matrix Resurrections, because I personally liked it. So I'll speak to it from my biased opinion, because only that's all I can do. I can give you my opinion, right? So, and my opinion was that movie was done in a way that if you tried to go back and basically do a Matrix 4 that was very much like the first three movies, then I don't think it would work in today's society, although that was maybe the expectation of most people going to see it. But in my opinion, I think the new Matrix reflects the society we live in today, the metaverse society. We live in a world
Sure.
where might actually be plugged into the Matrix not too long from now, and I think that the new Matrix movie tackled that much more head on and in a very, dare I say, meta way. And it provides you a sense of escapism that most nostalgia content tries to do, because it takes you out of the time you're living in and the daily grind, and it takes you to a different time. I think that's really the core of what nostalgia is. That's what it tries to capture. But I think when there's too much nostalgia, then you run out of room for new ideas.
In terms of things that worked, we talked about the Spider-Man movie where they brought back 2 other Spider-Men. And with that, are we trying to say like, oh, my Spider-Man was the best. I really miss my Spider-Man. Is anybody ever going to recognize that was the best one? And then we get that. And as an audience member, we sort of feel that, oh, they recognize like that particular iteration meant a lot to me.
They accommodated everyone. It's rare.
They did, but is that what we're trying to do? We're trying to recapture the past. We're trying to look at our childhood and say, man, I miss those. It's sort of this have your cake and eat it too, false promise. And that's what rubs me the wrong way about it.
It's a curiosity.
Yeah.
What if?
Let me counter that, because
Okay.
I think we're being too cynical. Are we being too cynical? I think
I was going to say this. Okay, yeah, we're on
no,
the same
because
page.
Roland, you follow like what I'm saying, but let me set the stage, right? Like, because I feel like there's a good way to do this and there's a bad way to do this. You could have your cake and eat it too. Trust me, I've done it. There's a piece of cake sitting on the table. I'll have it and I'll eat it too. But getting back to talking about movies, like for example, that new Spider-Man movie, I think that was an example of they did nostalgia well. Like they brought it back, but they didn't let the nostalgic elements take over the entire movie. They were like, we need to move this story forward that we've been following for the 2 previous movies, or if you count the Avengers films, like 4 or 5 of them. And it struck the balance right. So to me, like that was having your cake and eating it too. But then again, there's plenty of examples where they tried to do that and nostalgia completely took over, or they had nostalgic elements, but it didn't serve any purpose. Like Roland, am I sort of on the same page with what you were gonna say?
Yeah, I was going to say, well, nostalgia, there's 2 ways of thinking. Anybody that knows me knows that I can be extremely cynical about nostalgia. If you're looking in the past, it's hard to go forward. But, everybody here is making some really good points, so props to everybody, I want to say. But there's a couple ways of looking at it. One, you can say, like, hey, when I was a kid, I loved this story. And it was like Mag's talking about, like, this is going to be a new audience that somebody's probably never heard of this take, so why don't we make this again for the newer audience so they can focus on that? And then there's also the negative way of thinking of, wow, that was a huge success back then, why couldn't that be a huge success now? It depends on the soul of the take. Like, if they're putting something new and innovative, like, I really hate to do this, guys, I'm so sorry, but the Evil Dead reboot, that was an incredible twist on the movie. That was a really weird reboot because they didn't even have Ash Williams, the main character. They had a different final girl.
Yeah.
Right.
So it depends. If you're putting your heart into new technology, new perspective, then I think it's a good and healthy way of living the nostalgia. But if you're doing it for quick cash, that's when it becomes bad.
I completely agree. I mean, look what they did to Mandalorian. They just took the character, and I'm sorry I'm going back to it, but speaking of a different way of approaching it, instead of throwing themselves at the green screen, they came up with, new technology, the LED screen, and it didn't even help.
Yeah.
Stagecraft, right?
Yep, that's what it's called. ILM. Yeah.
It Right. It didn't even help with, for actors to engage with it, but it made lighting, like transitions, everything so much better. But then we cannot say the same thing about the Book of Boba Fett, because that was clearly such a money-making thing. It's like they took this one aspect that worked in The Mandalorian and just threw the cash in it, more special effects, more everything, and let's just say it wasn't as great. And I know I'm meant to be advocating for reboots, but they should be done smartly. When they're done right, they work. That's why I'm not saying they shouldn't keep trying. They should at least try. But that's my question to you, Andrew. Do you think is that your sort of way of saying we shouldn't reboot or make sequels out of anything? Should we just have original screenplays?
Well, I do think we're seeing more reboots and more remakes than original content. And I think for younger audiences, it doesn't do anything to have Tobey Maguire in a Spider-Man movie. They just go, who's that? If you are talking about people who are storytellers, I'm sure there's a lot of original screenplays out there that are brilliant that we're just not going to see because we can't tap into their audience that already exists. And plenty of actors who probably can do a lot more than what we've seen from actors we trust. And so I think we're cutting off a lot of potential great content by just showing people what we've already seen.
Yeah. Well, look, but before the start of the show, Mags was going to, just to let you guys know, those of you watching or listening, Mags was going to make the argument about, I think we're being too cynical. You can still kind of go and watch the original. You don't have to go be a fan of the new stuff, like make your opinion be heard by your wallet, like how you spend your money, because ultimately, money drives every situation. So if the new reboots, rehashes, remakes, and everything start to fail, maybe Hollywood starts going after more original content. Like, I think back in the 90s, that was a big deal, where it was the heyday of the spec scripts. I was just looking up, I went down a rabbit hole, and I was looking up like how many spec script sales have been happening over the years. And like in the 90s, it used to be in the hundreds every year. And today, that number has dropped like significantly, to the point where I think like 2020, I saw one of the numbers I saw was like 20 specs scripts were sold. That's a very small number. Now, of course, we're talking about major studios, production companies, and producers buying stuff, but something that would then be produced at a Hollywood level, like in the 90s. Like, for example, the original Matrix a spec script in a sense, because the guys had only really made one $10 million movie before. I think it was even less than that. And then the Wachowskis were like pitching the script to Warner Brothers, and Warner Brothers gave them a chance because they were like, we sort of like what you did with that one movie, and that's enough of a resume for us to give you an opportunity to execute on this original script. But I just don't feel like there's enough of that happening today. So definitely that's part of the problem. But I think when people vote with their wallets, that's probably going to help turn the tide more than anything else. So yeah, I feel like we have sort of talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly. But just kind of wrapping it up, I'm gonna ask each of you guys, talking about nostalgia content, the lure and the pitfalls of nostalgia. Overall, having looked at it from all of these different angles, how do you feel about reboots and remakes and sequels and adaptations? Do you feel like it's bad for society in general? Do you feel like this is great? Give me more? Or are you landing somewhere in the middle? So, Max, I'm going to start with you. Like, what do you think? Should we stop doing, sequels, reboots, and all of that stuff, and just no nostalgia anymore? All things original, or the complete opposite, or somewhere in the middle? What do you think?
No, I mean they can do it, but it just should be done right. Because we had some cases, as Roland earlier mentioned, and I talked about Star Wars and stuff, and we'll see what's going to happen to Lord of the Rings. But yes, sequels, reboots do tend to work. It's a great marketing tool if done right. Unfortunately, studios tend to throw money on something that they don't give the treatment the product deserves, essentially. So less of that, more of that.
So what you're saying is if the creator's heart's in the right place and they have the best of intentions in mind and they put the story first, that's
you
probably
can have.
yeah.
I mean, creators usually have, the best intentions. Usually it's when the studio where, people from the top actually get involved more than the creators. Because often it's not down to them. They do want to use, the best part of the story, or they have this certain vision. However, studios still have certain checkboxes that they would like the film, the TV show, the game even to fit, to attract, to do numbers, to attract the audience and make money for them.
Yeah. So it seems like creators often get stuck in the middle of like studio requirements versus what they want to do with the story. But Roland, I'll throw it to you. Where do you land? I mean, Mags, it seems like lands somewhere in the middle. You can do it well if it's done, if you do it right. But otherwise it's we have all seen bad examples of nostalgia. So Roland, what are your thoughts?
I gotta stay in the middle. I'm sorry. There's too many. First off, you're never gonna get rid of reboots. Let's get that out of the way. There's so many stories out there that have been created. Yeah, really.
Really? I'm sorry, I'm being cynical.
You're good.
I'm being cynical.
But I think it's almost impossible to get rid of reboots because I think first off, people are gonna unintentionally reboot something, but there's so many ways of looking at a story that you have unlimited possibilities. But at the same time, and I'll say this again, please actually care about the story. Please, care about the soul and what the characters' meanings and all this. Because sometimes you'll get something that will be really good at first, but then it'll end terribly. Like you can tell, like when they were first writing this, like this was cool, this was interesting, like Cowboy Bebop. Let me just say this a little bit, and I'll end my rant. But
yes,
I watched the first 2 episodes, and I gave it a review on here that I regret. It's lost me sleep, where I said it was good. First 2 episodes, I liked. They were fun. They were kooky. The more I watched it, the more I could tell, like, hey, I don't know if I agree with this. I don't know if I think you're losing track of what this is. So I'm gonna stay. Andrew, I already know your opinion, but go ahead and
You know what? I'm gonna surprise you. And I'm actually glad you brought up Cowboy Bebop, because while I do think that the content that we're gravitating to, the Marvel stuff, the Star Wars stuff, the Lord of the Rings stuff, it's had its time in the spotlight for a long time. The kind of stuff that I actually do like in terms of adaptations, I'm an animation guy, so I'm excited when they do the live action adaptations of animated shows. I find that really fun and interesting. I think when they did the Scooby-Doo movies, those were kind of fun, especially when you had
agreed. Yeah.
When you had Matt
them,
Lillard playing Shaggy in both the animated show, but he was also a great live action Shaggy. It just worked. I think something that would actually work in terms of hype and they'd be dumb not to do it, is a Rick and Morty live action show movie.
Oh, I think they are.
Are they doing it? I saw a poster or something, and I wasn't sure if it was just an April Fool's thing. But, when there's a reason for it, I think go ahead and do it. I just think that most of the time the reason is, let's see if we can squeeze a bit more money out of it.
Yeah.
So
That's
basically,
true.
all of you guys are in agreement saying that nostalgia is not entirely a bad thing. It could be a good thing when done right. So basically, you're saying, yes, let's do some nostalgia. It depends. Like there's qualifications. You have to put story first, like Roland said. Like what Mag said as well. If it's done right and you're not focusing on the wrong reasons for rebooting it. Whether it's financially motivated or otherwise. And that's what Andrew you said as well. So, and I agree with you. I think that we started out talking about how a lot of nostalgia content is initially, at least, financially motivated, but if you put it in the right hand and the right creator's mind, and put the right people behind it, and they do it justice, they do it well, you can have your cake and you can eat it too. You could do that. Sorry, I'm going to use that analogy again. but yeah, I think we're all in agreement, and with that, I think we've reached a pretty decent verdict there. You know, nostalgia content, bad,
I
good.
love how we got to this. At first, we were all cynical, but
Somewhere in the middle.
slowly just
I am-
slowly were like,
Yeah, reel ourselves
Yeah.
back a little bit. You know, let's because here's the thing: it's a guilty pleasure at the very least, or at the worst case scenario, it's a guilty pleasure, and best case scenario, you know, we can't have enough of it. So
I think that's fair.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's fair.
Absolutely. Even I love my Batman and Robin rewatch every once in a while and get my George Clooney showing off the Batman credit
Ugh.
card up on screen, or like the puns from Arnold, like chill, allowing me to break the ice. I'm doing a terrible
just-
impersonation.
It makes your heart
that was an
warm.
impersonation.
I was trying. I was half trying.
I have an interesting question, just really quickly. Like, what do you guys think is going to be rebooted in 15, 20 years that we're seeing now? I'm thinking Stranger Things for sure. They're going to reboot it, or like put it in like a different.
I can so imagine that. Can you
something.
imagine? Like, I think Millie Bobby Brown just turned 18 a couple of days ago, this past week, and 15 years from now, she will be in her 30s. Like, she could play like the mom. Who plays the mom in the current one?
Winona
Winona.
Ryder.
Winona
Winona
Ryder.
Ryder. Can you imagine? Like, like Millie Bobby Brown is like Winona Ryder's age, and then she's like, that would be totally like I'm just putting
Careful,
ideas
Netflix
into the
is
mind of
listening,
Yeah.
Netflix
so let's-
right now.
Let's chill out.
Yeah. No, I think I don't think we're ever gonna really run out, because even if you run out of stuff to reboot that's been done to that, you can always go back and reboot those classics. Like, I'm sure in 10 years from now we'll get another A Star Is Born. So
Yeah.
I think nostalgia is more inherently a reflection of us as human beings than maybe anything else. But with that, I think we will wrap it up there. But before we go, let's pitch all of our socials, because we're doing a lot of great stuff that you don't necessarily see on YouTube or hear on the podcast. And if you'd like to see and check all of that stuff out, then follow us. Be our friend, please. We really appreciate it. It can get lonely around here sometimes, you know. You can check us out on osocurious.com. You can also go on Twitter, oso_curious. You can also go on Instagram, check out all the fantastic images that we are putting out, all the graphics. You know, we cut some decent reels together, some nice video, keep you busy during the day. You got some free time, you know, you're going to get coffee and you want to watch it. 30-second reel where Roland is ranting about Christmas presents. Go check it out. It's at o_so_curious. Or you can find us on Facebook if you still are on Facebook, or Meta platforms, you know, whatever you want to call that. Also Curious, we're on there as well. But with that said, thanks for watching. Please do like and subscribe. Leave us a comment below. Let us know your thoughts. If you are listening to us at the podcast, you know, give us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate your support, your patronage, and all the different ways that you are enjoying our content. We really do appreciate you stopping by. We talked a lot about nostalgia today. Maybe we'll revisit this episode and do a reboot of the Nostalgia Trap. I just realized that was a play on the Parent Trap, and now it's blowing my mind. So on that note, let's end the show.
Also a
and-
remake.
Also a remake. Oh my god. Okay, I think that's enough. We will be here all day remaking remakes. But until next time, it's been Also Curious. Go and have a fantastic week. We will see you next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.